Hey there, it's Luke Thomas, the founder of Friday, and I want to walk you through kind of something I've been thinking about recently. So, the long story short is I've been doing a lot of thinking about kind of remote work as kind of the new normal and what that means for organizations and how, even forward thinking companies can take advantage of what's next. And so I'll kind of walk you through where my brain is at. So over the weekend, I saw this really interesting statistic where someone analyzed Hacker News job postings that mention a remote option. So for those unaware with Hacker News, basically what they have is a section where you can hire, and they will look at the posting and they ask that, if remote is an option, that you post it. So this person, as they mentioned here, the script only looks at the first line, checks if a word remote is present, nothing more sophisticated. So basically, it's just looking at, how many job postings are on Hacker News with remote work as an option. So what you can see, and naturally this is what you would expect, is there's kind of this linear growth that's kind of slow, but there has been growth. And then in 2020, I think early days of the pandemic, this exploded, and it continues to grow. And so I've mentioned this in many, many different places, but what we know about remote work, at least as an option, is that it basically has a very high kind of net promoter score. Basically, of the people that work remotely or have the option to work remotely, the data, according to Buffer and others, says that these people overwhelmingly recommend this as an option. And so while remote work isn't perfect for everybody, the idea of a more flexible work environment is very, very appealing as a perk. And so it seems like what's happening here, I talk about this idea of a network effect. As more companies offer a remote first option, especially in technology, this forces everybody else to offer this as well. If you don't, you may lose some of your best talent, and you may struggle to recruit, right? Just because your geographical pool of your hiring pool is so much smaller. And so what we're seeing here is that, this is in many ways the new normal, especially in technology. And so if this is a new normal, what that means is, I think about a remote first company that maybe existed 3 or 4 years ago. If remote work as an option is kind of this new normal, what comes next? And how can forward-thinking organizations level up their hiring or, perks or however their company operates and basically continue to push the industry forward? And here's what I think is going to happen. So if we look at the data, people love remote work, not necessarily because they can just, sit in their office like I'm doing right now from home, but instead because it offers a more flexible work environment and in which you feel like you have freedom and autonomy to do your best work, no matter where that is. I consider this to be the tip of the iceberg, though. What's happening beneath the surface is that people not only want to work where they want, but they also want to work when they want. And so, I as an individual, I really like working earlier in the morning. That's when I'm most productive. I am not very productive later in the afternoon. But for someone else on my team, it may be the exact opposite. And so the business, if you want to really tap into when people are most productive, you need to kind of go another level deeper and provide even more autonomy. So not only should you give people the freedom to work where they want, but you should also give them the freedom to work at a time that makes the most sense for them. And so this is where I think organizations in the future can really level up. And so the premise is that the forward-thinking organizations will lean more and more into asynchronous work as a default. Asynchronous work is basically, this idea of maximizing time to focus, reducing the pings in Slack, reducing, the number of Zoom calls that you need to have. It's kind of about picking the best tool for the job at hand, and just recognizing that Zoom calls are great for relationship building and getting to know each other and removing ambiguity, kind of doing brainstorming, but they're not that great for status updates and for basic information sharing or kind of creating context. And so the forward-thinking organizations will lean more and more into asynchronous work. And I think what we're going to see happen in the future is a couple things. The first is that there needs to be, or there will be, some type of mechanism for companies and candidates being able to suss out if a company is really an async first company. I think the best way of determining that is to just look at someone's calendar. You know, how many internal meetings do they have every week? What does the breakdown look like? You know, and once again, we're not aiming for 0 meetings, but we're aiming for really thoughtful meetings. And so that's part one. I think a lot of candidates will start asking, you know, the companies that they're thinking about working for to see, like, what does your calendar look like? Show me more about like how you're allocating your time and what the flexibility around when you work actually looks like. The second thing, and I'm just going to skip over to another article, is this idea of a 4-day work week. And, you know, the 4-day work week kind of seems a little crazy, I think, to most organizations. However, I do think that this is, in some ways, a sign of things to come. And so the 4-day work week, what I like about it is that it creates constraint. And for those unaware, there's this idea called Parkinsons Law, which is that work expands to fill the time that you've given it. And so by compressing the amount of time that you have in a given week to get things done, it forces focus and prioritization. I really think that's interesting. The downside of the 4-day work week, I would argue, is that I think for many companies, it may seem like too big of a jump. You know, what you have to do is really retool and re-architect the way that your company operates. I personally am inclined to think like a 4.5-day work week would be much easier to adopt, because then you don't have to, you know, think about what would happen if, you know, like everybody took a Friday off. Like you have to be able to respond to your customers. You need to like have some, you know, service level agreements there. But I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the future, because this is a tangible representation of a shift to a more autonomous way of working, right? The 4-day work week basically puts a stake in the ground and says, hey, like, we are really, really effective and efficient with our time. And so I think, you know, here's the moral of the story with this video. Remote work in many ways is the new normal, especially if you work in tech. What comes next? I would argue, like I said throughout this video, that I think we're going to see more and more companies adopt like the 4-day work week. I think we're going to see businesses and candidates really digging into like calendars and seeing exactly how people are spending their time. And I think there's a need to create kind of more tangible ways to show that you are creating an asynchronous first workplace where meetings are spent really, really well and where you give people a huge amount of freedom to work when it makes sense for them. So anyway, I hope this video makes sense. Just a few thoughts as I start my week. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.